This lecture is on hearing, which is part of chapter 5. A quote I really like is, "Hearing is listening to what is said. Listening is hearing what isn't said." I think there's a big difference between simply hearing someone and actually listening to what they say and listening to what they're not saying. So I really like that quote. But let's get into the auditory system. I included a picture here of the different parts of the auditory system. We won't go through all of those parts, but we'll look at some of those in greater detail and what they do. First, the pinna. That's the visible part of the ear. That's what you see when you look at someone. It's what you see when you look in the mirror. After that, there's the eardrum. The eardrum is a thin flap of skin that stretches tight like a drum and vibrates when sound hits it. These vibrations move the tiny bones of the middle ear, which send vibrations to the inner ear. From the inner ear, the message is sent to the brain. So this is kind of the path that sound follows to get to the brain. The hammer, anvil, and stirrup, those are the tiny bones in the middle ear. They move sound vibrations from your eardrum to your cochlea, which is part of your inner ear also. And there, the vibrations convert into electrical signals that reach your brain so you can hear. A little interesting facts I included there is that the hammer, anvil, and stirrup are the smallest bones in your body. So they're just little tiny bones in your ear, which I found interesting. The cochlea that we just mentioned is a fluid-filled, snail-shaped structure that contains the sensory receptor cells of the auditory system. The activation of these hair cells is a mechanical process. The stimulation of the hair cell ultimately leads to activation of the cell. As hair cells become activated, they then generate the neural impulses that go to the brain. And these neural impulses are sent to the auditory cortex, which we'll look at next. The auditory cortex is a critical component of the brain that processes auditory information. It's located in the temporal lobe, and its primary function is to receive and interpret sound signals from the ears. The auditory cortex is responsible for analyzing and categorizing different sound frequencies and patterns, allowing individuals to perceive and recognize different types of sounds, including speech, music, and of course any other sounds in our environment. So that's an important part of the brain because that's how we determine what sound is, and the pitch and the tone and all those different types of sounds. So how do we perceive pitch? Pitch is how high or low a sound is. Obviously, we perceive different pitches. Everything isn't at the same pitch. So lower frequency sounds, as you can see on the left, are lower pitched, and high frequency sounds, as you can also see on the left, are higher pitched. So that's essentially the difference in why we perceive things as lower pitched or higher pitched. What accounts for pitch perception? Temporal theory is one assertion of that, and it asserts that frequency is coded by the activity level of a sensory neuron. This would mean that a given hair cell would fire action potentials related to the frequency of the sound wave. This is a very intuitive explanation. We detect such a broad range of frequencies, so the human ear can detect 20 to 20,000 hertz, that the frequency of action potentials fired by hair cells cannot account for the entire range. Because of properties related to sodium channels on the neuronal membrane that are involved in action potentials, there's a point at which a cell cannot fire any faster. Another account for pitch perception is the place theory, which suggests that different portions of the basilar membrane are sensitive to the sounds of different frequencies. More specifically, the basilar membrane responds best to high frequencies, and the tip of the basilar membrane responds best to low frequencies. Therefore, hair cells that are in the base portion would be labeled as high pitch receptors. They receive the high pitches, and those in the tip of the basilar membrane would be labeled as low pitch receptors. And if you want to see where the basilar membrane is exactly located, you can look back at the image of the auditory system that was at the beginning of the PowerPoint. So how do we locate sound? There's two different ways. Monaural cues relies on sounds reaching a single ear, as you can see on the left diagram, to constrain the set of possible sound sources. Binaural cues is use of both ears to perceive the world of sound around us. And those are different. When we hear sound in one ear, it is interpreted differently than when we hear sound in both ears. So let's look at hearing loss, which is a big part of the auditory system and happens to a lot of people. Deafness, of course, is the partial or complete inability to hear. Congenital deafness is when someone is born without the ability to hear. Conductive hearing loss is due to a problem delivering sound energy to the cochlea, which we discussed that part of the ear earlier. Causes for conductive hearing loss include blockage of the ear canal, a hole in the tympanic membrane, problems with the ossicles or fluid in the space between the eardrum and cochlea. Sensorineural hearing loss is the most common form of hearing loss, and it can be caused by many factors, such as aging. We know that often aging includes hearing loss, unfortunately. Head trauma, infections and diseases, certain medications, environmental effects such as noise exposure, tumors and toxins. Toxins found in certain solvents and metals can cause hearing loss. And of course, environmental factors would include things like regular exposure to loud music or construction equipment. Those things could cause sensorineural hearing loss. So that's the end of the lecture on the auditory system. I know there's some detailed and complicated parts in there, but hopefully those definitions help you understand it a little bit better. And as usual, if you have any questions, please let me know.